the shoes that I wore in my very first budget, which was now 4 years ago, were shoes that were actually in need of some repair. So she repaired those shoes. And the idea was this shows sort of a continuation of our project to help Canadians.
Keeping with tradition, Federal Finance Minister Bill Morneau unveiled his federal budget shoes this morning, but they aren't new. The woman who repaired Morneau's shoes retrained as a cobbler to launch her own business. Morneau says new skills training for workers will be one focus of next week's budget. So what will that skills training look like? The CBC's David Cochran has some new details, and he joins me now. Hey, David.
Hey, how are you?
So what are those new details?
Yeah, what they're going to look at is creating what's called a lifelong learning account. And this is the idea that it's a fund that the government sets up and seeds with some opening capital that you and I, if we want to retrain or do some self-directed learning throughout our life, we can tap into that and use it to pay for training at a pre-approved institution or a pre-approved program. The specifics of how it's going to work, we have to wait until Tuesday on budget day. But what I'm told is that it's based on a similar program in Singapore called the Skills Future Program. And the way it works there is anyone in Singapore over the age of 25 had a personalized account. The government put $500 in it to get it going with the promise of future top-ups, and then you could tap into it for a wider range of programs. And it actually saw a fair amount of pickup in the first year. 180,000 people across all age spectrums use it to improve their skills and use upgrades. So this is something that they're trying to target here, largely because you have a challenge with workforce and repairing shoes, maybe repairing workers rather than replacing them, because you've got automation, you've got precarious work, you have people who need support in broadening and adapting their skills as the workplace adapts. And this is one part of what will be a suite of measures on skills development in the budget on Tuesday to help people deal with that.
And it's not just skills development. What else are you expecting in the budget?
Yeah, there's 4 big themes in this budget, right? They like big, broad, thematic budgets, and this is what they're going to be. So there's going to be skills. We just talked a bit about that. There's going to be support for seniors. There's going to be housing affordability, and in particular with a focus on millennials, because you're finding with a lot of people under the age of 39 and down having a hard time breaking into the property market, above and beyond the reasons outlined in places like Vancouver and Toronto, where you have very localized hyperinflationary factors coming into play. They're looking at some sort of structural changes to help people there. And then another big one, which will definitely be an election theme, Vashti, is pharmacare. We saw the interim report of the National Pharmacare Plan from Dr. Eric Hoskins. The 2 big obvious recommendations that came out of that were the creation of a national arm's length agency that would negotiate drug prices to try to force them down through bulk buying, and also set a common list of covered drugs, a national formulary. We don't know if those are going to be the specific things on Tuesday, but we are assured we will see next steps on pharmacare in the budget. That would be a big one they could take just based out of the interim report. But we know for sure lifelong learning is coming, an account is coming for Canadians to deal with the changing workplace.
Okay, we'll be standing by for those details on Tuesday. Looking
We'll talk
forward
a
to it. You bet, a lot. Thanks, David. The CBC's David Cochran. As you just heard, some other items expected in the budget are help for Canadians looking to get into the housing market and a nod towards national pharmacare in some capacity. How could the government tackle those issues? Trevin Stratton is Chief Economist with the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. Hi, Mr. Stratton. Great to see you.
Great to see you too.
Thank you for coming in. Let's pick up on what David was talking about, skills training, and this idea of money to help retrain. What do you think of that idea?
I mean, I think the business community is very much in favor of this. When I'm traveling around the country talking to businesses, no matter what sector they're in, what region they're in, the size of their business, they talk about the skills gap, and that is a big issue for them. On top of individual learning accounts, I think a big issue will also be looking at work-integrated learning and funding for that.
What does that mean?
So partnerships between businesses, between educational institutions, and obviously governments as well, to have on-the-job training. Similarly, I think immigration is going to be a big way to fill the skills gap as well. So there was an announcement that there's going to be a rural and northern immigration pilot, which is based on a similar system that was in Atlantic Canada previously, where we're able to fast-track immigrants with skills that are needed in local, rural, and northern communities to meet their skills needs.
When you talk about skills gap, can you qualify and quantify that? So what do you mean by that term, and how big is it?
So the first thing that I mean by that term is that the economy is moving and innovating so quickly that these skills in the labor market aren't necessarily matched to what businesses are demanding in the economy. And so, businesses are finding it difficult to find that. And so different initiatives, whether it's reskilling, upskilling, work-integrated learning, are able to fill that gap in one way.
Okay, so we saw in the fall fiscal update, for example, an update that was at least characterized as aimed towards corporate Canada, that trying to address that competitiveness issues. We saw some tax breaks that were aimed at increasing business investment. This one, the one that David just described, we're talking about pharmacare, affordable housing, seniors, and skills. It sounds a lot different. What kinds of things do you think you're going to see in this, speaking from a chamber perspective?
I definitely think pharmacare will be in there. And, when I talk to the business community, they are, I think most Canadians can agree that no one in this country should lack the medicine that they need. But there are different approaches to doing pharmacare, right? There's a single payer system, and which is run completely from the public sector perspective. And then there's also a filling in the gaps approach. And when we look at the numbers, it's, it depends what study you look at, but it's somewhere between 10 and 20% of Canadians are either uninsured or underinsured. And so when we talk to Canadians, most of them say that they're happy with the level of coverage that they have, that they're happy with the cost of their medicines, and also that most Canadians also have coverage. And so the question is, should we throw out the entire system to the tune of, I believe the parliamentary budget officer said it was $19.4 billion. To put that in perspective, that's larger than our entire federal budget deficit this year. Or should we, approach it in a way that fills in the gaps and provides coverage to those that are uninsured and underinsured that is done in a fiscally responsible way?
Does that address the concern, though, over, for example, having the MITE as a single payer to address drug prices, and specifically not, I know you're saying a lot of people feel like they have good coverage, but specifically, let's say, for rare drugs, which we know provinces have said are costing them a ton of money.
Absolutely, and not only provinces, but also employers, right? Through their plans, It's also costing them a lot of money. And so, there are ways to reduce the costs of those rare drugs through pooling mechanisms. That could work to do that and help the economy, help businesses, and also help government finances.
What about affordable housing? And I'm asking in the context of some new numbers that are out about debt right now. Yeah. Tell us a bit about your understanding of personal debt loads and how that might be impacted by making it easier for people to get into the housing market. It's kind of a two-sided coin there, yeah.
Absolutely, and so you may recall there was this plan, kind of the drivers of economic growth for the past few years have been housing and consumption. And there was a plan to change that because of our debt levels and because of housing prices in this country towards investment and exports being the drivers of growth. But if we look at the most recent numbers, the new housing price index this morning, home prices are down for the first time in 3 decades. If we look at consumption, it's growing at its slowest rate in almost 4 years. If we look at investment in Q4 of 2018, it was down 2.7%. And if we look at exports in December of last year, they were down 3.8%. And so all these 4 drivers are not doing well. And so affordable housing is very important. But when we're talking about economic growth, there are a lot of other aspects that the business community is looking at to spur investment and also to increase exports.
Okay, I want to ask you about those that they're looking at. But first, what do you think is behind the numbers that you just laid out?
I think there's a lot of uncertainty in the market right now, and we hear that word all the time. Some of it has to do with regulatory uncertainty in terms of interprovincial trade. Also, obviously, with TMX last year, there's a lot of uncertainty that resulted related to that. Because no matter what side of that debate you are on, whether you think that expansion should have been built or not, what you can't deny is that another company that's looking at this company that thought that it jumped through all the hoops, and then they still couldn't build what they wanted. Another company is going to question whether they're going to be able to do that in Canada as well.
Is there any sort of assurance provided by the fact that we see that the federal government is complying sort of letter by letter with what the federal court laid out, and that they did lay out sort of a prescriptive path forward? We see yesterday, for example, Amarjeet Sohi, the Minister of Natural Resources, saying that Indigenous portion of the consultation will likely be done in 90 days. We know they've bought the pipeline. Is there any sort of heightened level of assurance within the business community that this thing might actually get built?
Well, and I wouldn't say that there's a lot of assurance that this thing might get built, but there is definitely, we have confidence that the government will try its best to do that. What I think is that it's a bit more of a macro issue than just TMX, though. It has to do with the regulatory burden in this country writ large, right? It has to do with transportation, it has to do with construction, it has to do with interprovincial trade, and when we look at global rankings when it comes to the regulatory burden in Canada, which increases the cost of doing business, it's very high.
So what could you see in the budget that would address that?
So we saw in the fall economics statement that there were certain regulations or certain aspects of our regulatory system that were being addressed. There was an announcement that there was going to be a creation of a Center for Regulatory Innovation, that competitiveness was going to be included in regulator mandates, that the government was really going to focus on reducing interprovincial trade barriers when it comes to construction and when it comes to transportation. And what the business community is really looking for in the budget is, well, what's the progress on these announcements? I mean, is there going to be funding allocated to them? What is the timelines? And they're really looking for leadership when it comes to this.
And what's your sense of where you think things are at?
Well, in terms of going forward, I think the government is well aware of the issue. And if you look at the numbers, I mean, no one can be unaware of the issues. And I'm sure that they're very concerned about what took place at the end of last year. Of course, there are also a number of tax initiatives too, accelerated capital cost allowance, which were also supposed to spur investment.
Has it?
Well, if you look at the numbers, no, it hasn't, right?
Not
I mean,
yet,
investment's down in Q4. Granted, the fall economic statement was in November.
Yeah, could it be that we're waiting to see that?
Could be. And I mean, that's a big question. That's a decision that the government's definitely going to have to make. And there is one indicator that is doing well, and that's jobs. If we look at kind of the first two announcements on jobs numbers this year, they were doing very well, but that tends to be a bit of a lagging indicator. And so the question is whether the government thinks that is a harbinger of things to come, or whether that's also going to decrease in the future.
Question that we might get answered in Tuesday's budget. Thank you so much, Trevin Stratton with the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. Really appreciate your time.